So, are you guys doing prepping wrong? Well, what I mean by that is so often I've spent like so many people, including me, have spent like thousands of dollars on things that you don't really need or end up being redundant or just aren't quality or you do the wrong thing and it's a mistake. And how do you know what the right thing is, right? The right answer when it comes to prepping. And it's kind of with anything, it really comes down to planning. And that's really how it should all be. And that's what you guys should be thinking about is it's about planning. So you need to decide what are you preparing for as a prepper, right? Are we preparing for war with Iran and it might be a cyber attack or something like that, or EMPs or financial collapse? You look at the value of the dollar and it might be disappearing. Well, I think we all need to spend some time imagining what that world would look like. And then when you have a clear picture and an understanding of that world, then we can kind of start to prepare and purchase things or design our world that matches that fear and disaster. So, I mean, obviously there's certain basics that we could do, like, having 2 weeks of food on hand, that's good prepping and whatever, start to keep our pantry full or that kind of thing. But just going and randomly ordering, a big bulk order of long-term food storage may not be the best play. And that's the thing. I think having an understanding of what you want, if you want to get into long range shooting, you don't just go start buying gun parts randomly off the internet. You kind of put together what you want, like what you're trying to build. Or, if your goal is to have a career as something, you start to take the classes and things that really build into exactly what you're focused on. And by doing a little planning, you can save thousands of dollars. Kevin, what type of things would people even be preparing for? What is the
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that a lot of different people. When I ask around, a lot of people prep for different reasons. Natural disaster is a major one. Especially if you're in a place that's prone to that. Places that are prone to hurricanes or tornadoes, earthquakes. If you're in Hawaii, you might have to worry about volcanoes.
right? Yeah, you might be up and running. And that's the thing. So if somebody buys stuff for, hey, I'm going to make my compound perfect, but your real fear is preparing for a volcano, then that's not really, being able to have a bunch of heavy camping gear isn't really going to be the answer
hmm
when it's how do I, scoot and boot or whatever out of here. Maybe your money's best spent on a pickup truck
hmm
or some kind of, bug out
or a
vehicle
boat.
that's little, yeah, a boat, right?
I remember a couple of a couple of years ago, there was a volcano was going off there in Hawaii. People had to flee, and a bunch of people were out in the water because that's the only way they could get away was to swim out. And a couple of people drowned just trying to get out in the water far enough that they were safe from the lava flow. Um, Other stuff people are prepping
Yeah,
for is EMPs. That's a big one, right? Power's out, everything's out. Um, if you don't have a little Faraday cage built in your house where you can store some of your stuff, everything's going to be lost. Your phone, your car, your everything. Um, Unemployment. Some people prep for just not having a job suddenly.
absolutely.
Maybe you can't pay your bills, but you can still eat. You can prep for that.
Well, well, that's the thing. I think a lot of people buy like camping gear or, they envision some kind of, oh, preppers, I watched that show Alone or something, and they're out in the woods trying to make do. And that's a possibility and something you might have to prepare for. But I mean, odds are most of us aren't like, oh, we need to go hide out in the woods for, to avoid the dollar collapsing. Like that one doesn't really, equal the other, right? However, building a home that can deal with no electricity or grid failures going on and off, or not being able to afford your electric bill, or needing to cut down the electricity that you're using to half, or
Hmm.
that kind of thing. Those things are going to be a lot more practical if that's what you're preparing for. And I think that's, I guess, what I'm trying to get at is, we spend so much focus on the wrong thing, and the right thing is to have a plan, to say, well, what would happen, to consider the scenarios and lay it out if the event that you're preparing for happens. Like you said, a volcano, right? If I need to up and go, well, maybe having half of my stuff staged over at grandma's house that's on the other side of the island, or outside the kind of zone, maybe that's a good thing. Or maybe it's preparing financially that I can up and run. Or maybe it's having a house in Belize because I think America's just going to crap and I need to, be able to up and exit, That's, you don't know, like everybody's scenario is different. So to have like a one size all prepping plan is not realistic, and it's not practical, and it
Right.
does depend on your situation. Maybe your family is your support system, whereas somebody else might be the single guy who wants to go, over to the farm with the family, or maybe the extended family is coming to him because he's the guy, who's prepared and has things. But you need to plan for that world, for things to be set up. So that's the big thing. So I think the first thing you should do when coming up with a prepping plan is, one, decide. Now, obviously, there are multi things that can happen, right? We all think that the dollar is kind of slipping and losing value. I think it's naive to think that inflation isn't happening. Do we all believe that it's going to become the Weimar Republic and it's going to be worth, burning the paper because it's not worth anything? I don't think everybody's in that boat yet. Although when you look at the national debt, but I got to say, I listen to the prepper books and they're all like, yeah, the world went crazy and all of a sudden the national debt is 24 trillion. And I'm like, dude, that was half of what it is now. It's like 38 or
Yeah.
39 or something right now, right? And we thought the world was going to end then, and it doesn't. It keeps going on, which is kind of scary. It's kind of weird how that none of it really matters. And you're like, well, this time it's different,
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Well, I know I've spent a lot of time prepping for zombies,
mm,
and then what happens? Then it's werewolves.
right,
You know what I mean?
right. Or Bigfoot. I know in
Uh,
your area it's Bigfoot.
Bigfoot apocalypse. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, well, I think that there's a few staples though that are pretty safe to prep for in general.
Mhm.
And one of those is your skill set. You know, one of those is knowing how to change your tire on your car, knowing how to, build a house, knowing how to, get food, set traps, set snares, hunt, track. All those things are going to be valuable in almost every situation that you come into.
Absolutely. And that's like even more. I mean, it's how do you cook with what, with limited resources? How do you, all these survival skills? Just, I gotta say, one of the things is being able to like think on your feet or assess a problem. That was one of the big things I really appreciated a couple of times. I remember one like defining moment early on in my life. I used to work with my brother running water plants like you, and and I had a problem and called him out, and I'm 17, 18, young and dumb and whatever. And I'm like, hey, this, I can't handle it. And he came out and he's like, well, what do you think I'm going to do? Like, why are you calling somebody else? If you call the plumber, what's the plumber going to do? What's the, like, think it through for a minute. Now, obviously, as an average citizen, I may not have all the plumbing knowledge or, like in my world, I don't know all if it was how do I bake a cake, I wouldn't know all the secret insights. I can follow a recipe, but I don't know the outside tricks and whatever. So somebody can bring more knowledge, but think it through and having that mindset of, let me just think, what am I going to do? Or what is somebody else going to do? Why can't I do this? And laying out problems like that. The next thing, when I got into the military and got into electronics and electrical stuff, and the military I felt was really good at teaching you how to troubleshoot. And one of the big things was cutting the problem in half and like basically defining the problem. They were like, look, if you hit the button and the switch or the motor doesn't turn on, where's the problem? Well, it could be the button, it could be the wires in between, it could be the motor. Well, let's isolate that. When I hit the button, is it changing, when I move it? So that's one thing. That's one section right there. Instead of seeing it as a giant problem, I can break it into small bites.
Mhm.
And I think that's how we need to, approach solving problems in life is, let's instead of being overwhelmed, let's focus on the little sections and kind of break it down.
Mhm.
And I think that's what you need to do with prepping is define, all right, what's the big problem? Well, the economy is going to collapse. That's so bad and so scary. Okay, but what is my goal, right? My goal is to take care of my family. All right? So that's step 1. And so I don't need to worry about the whole world or, whatever. I mean, obviously I'm going to try and vote the right way and do the right thing, but I can't change that we're going to have a Democrat that spends too much money or a Republican that spends too much money. I can only vote for one of the two, or even, the libertarian that's not going to win, but that's, what am I going to do there? I'm stuck.
Mhm.
So I can't control that. That's beyond my ability. But what I can control is what I do with my family. Am I overextended? Do I have the best job that I can get while still taking care of my family and things at home? Sometimes making more money doesn't do me more good at what I could actually be doing. If I had more time with my family or at home, I could be doing more to prepare or set things up.
Yep.
You have to find that balance for your own life. Then, what does your family need, right? So, my family needs food to eat. Well, one, I guess the most important thing is they need shelter. They don't need the tax man or the government to take my house away, the
Right.
bank. So, I have that minimum standard. Now, can I choose to live in an area where the taxes aren't out of control? Or I can have a job that can pay for those high taxes or, something like that. So that's step 1. Then step 2, how am I going to feed my family? Well, all right, the grocery store, but the grocery store is getting expensive. I can have 2 options. I can either make a real lot of money where I can afford the grocery store, or I can learn to supplement all my food and that kind of thing. And that could be through a garden. That could be through raising rabbits. That could be through getting a milk cow. Maybe it's growing a bunch of cows and selling them or goats or something like that, right? Usually buying a cow doesn't solve money problems, has been my experience
That's
from
true.
what I see with people.
Mhm.
But there are other animals that you could solve your eating problems like
Yeah, I
chickens like
think
that. Go
chickens,
ahead.
in my experience, chickens are the best way to go, especially if you have a little bit of
Your dream
property.
animal?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you have a little bit of property, they can do a lot of feeding themselves, and
Yeah, absolutely.
and you can buy feed and supplement feed, and it's a lot less than eggs might be. A lot of people buy,
It's still expensive, but
a
yeah.
lot of people raise meat chickens.
Mhm,
Butchering
mhm.
and cleaning chickens has never been. I'm not a fan, but you can be eating chicken almost every day if you're raising meat chickens and you're good at at cleaning them and cooking them. Um,
Yeah.
Goats are great. Don't raise goats for meat because I have a friend of mine that butchered butchers animals pretty regularly, and he said he only butchered one. He only killed one goat, And he said he never did it again because you have to like become friends with the goat so it'll trust you enough that you can walk up to it and then you have to cut its throat. And he said he just felt bad, like killing your dog, you know?
Sounds horrible.
Yeah. So, but goats produce a lot of milk. It's something crazy, like 2 gallons a day, 3 gallons a day. And chickens, same way. If you have 10 chickens, you can be getting half a dozen eggs every single day. Um, depending on the season. I know
Yeah. Yeah.
wintertime maybe not so much. But there's a lot of there's a lot you can do for yourself when it comes to saving money. And growing a garden is probably the best bang for your buck as far
Absolutely.
as that goes.
If you have time. And that's the thing. Like I said, it's all a trade-off for time and money.
Hmm.
But obviously, a garden is way more sustainable, and you have way more control over your garden than you do over the prices in the grocery store. And so that's something that, that control you have really helps. So, and also, getting into hunting and things like that. You don't have to buy expensive guns and optics and things like that. You can pay attention and find like a cheap rifle for 200 bucks or something from somebody that'll be able to put down a deer. It turns out it's possible.
Yeah,
Um,
I think I think that's a big thing. If you're in guns, that's great, and you can go down the rabbit hole and spend thousands of dollars and really arm yourself with the top of the line stuff. But you can have an old shotgun that you buy from your uncle and get pretty proficient with that. Um, bird shot, it's great for taking out birds, but not much else. Um,
yeah,
but you can get all sorts of different types of ammunition and different. There's a lot of versatility with the shotgun, but that goes for a lot of things. Um, nice pickup truck. Uh, all sorts of options with what you're picking and choosing. I think one of the big mistakes that people make though is going out and spending a huge amount of money on one thing, buy a whole bunch of food, buy a whole bunch of firearms, buy a whole bunch of camping gear, even though they've never been camping before.
yeah, exactly.
I know there's a lot of different people doing what do they say? Don't put all your eggs in one basket. And I think that's a wise way to go about prepping.
That's it. Because, yeah, if you're counting on one thing, you don't know if some insect or, I know for years we were plagued by groundhogs just eating all our vegetables and, going through. So it's always something like that. Or maybe you don't get the deer, maybe things aren't lucky.
Mhm.
Now I have like a pack of coyotes running the neighborhood and,
That's
maybe they
that's not good.
scare away all the wildlife, or, it just things can change and diversity is a big thing. So, food, big thing, right? Part two, you need to think about security. Well, again, what am I really preparing for? Am I preparing to defend my home? Or am I preparing to be able to like run and gun and be whatever? Is it maybe it's just talking to my neighbors and hey, we block off the cul-de-sac or our section of the road. We can set up a little checkpoint with, protect 5 houses at one time. you know, what are you preparing for? Right. It really depends. Right. Sometimes having the old man sitting out on the front porch with the shotgun at night is enough, and if there's 5 houses in your little block of the street, one guy can do that and you can kind of have a rotation. Talking to your neighbors could be the solution.
Mhm.
And that's I guess really the focus though of what I wanted to talk about today is have a plan, have a structure before you spend money because it doesn't have to be money. That's money's fun, right? People get all excited about the gadgets and the, different things they can buy. I was just looking on the internet just now and earlier today and I was watching something about, the guy who makes $47,000 a year goes and buys like a $53,000 truck, right? And, and he pays for that. And then they were saying, but that guy's boss who maybe makes 230,000 a year, that guy is probably buys the $14,000 car because it's not about, having something flashy or showy, sometimes function in the right thing. And by jumping in and just buying whatever neat prepper thing that we see or chasing after the next emotional thing can be all wrong. Sometimes just putting thought and say, what's going to get the job done? You know, what can I do to take care of my family and I don't need to go crazy. You can buy reasonably priced seeds. They're not that expensive to start that garden. And, that's the whole, beauty of it is you spend the budget that's appropriate. And by having a plan, you don't have wasted redundancy. A lot of us run out and they're like, oh, I need a little like backpack water filter. Now, again, I think everybody should have like a 72-hour get home bag in your car. I think that's just reasonable, logical things to do. But all right, let's talk about what you need for that. I don't mean right now. I just mean let's, look into that. Do I just do the 72-hour that's going to be right for my family? What's going to get me home? Having a compasses and not knowing how to use a compass isn't going to help you. Having a map probably will. Those are the kind of things like knowing where you are, that kind of thing. Is it going to help you or is it not? Those are the kind of things you need to get excited about and, look for. Um, all right. So the next thing, we talked about security, right? Having the guns, having a plan, talking to somebody, but find again, what do you need for your family? You don't need a million guns. I might have more than one, but that's because I like to play with guns. That's my own problem. That's not, that's a fun hobby. That's not because, it's better to inspire your neighbor to buy him a gun instead of think I have to supply my whole neighborhood with guns to run a watch, that kind of stuff. Maybe it's communications, right? How am I going to get in touch with my family? Is that ham radio? Is that, all these different things they come out with that are pretty cool. They have all these different cell phones and devices and walkie-talkies. I always talk about I have the Motorola talkabouts for communication on like a compound or in the area. And those kind of things are pretty awesome. But again, is that where you should be spending your money? You need to look at your goals and what you're really trying to do and then decide where my priorities are. Now, I think your priority should always be food first. Another thing people overlook a lot is medical, right? What about your medication? What about that stuff? Could it be as easy as talking to my doctor? Hey, could I have a 90-day supply on hand? Could you do my prescriptions a little bit better, smarter? Having that uncomfortable conversation, it's just uncomfortable because who wants to talk to people? But having that conversation might take you a lot further. But then, obviously it can't be infinite, right? Like if somebody's dependent on insulin, he can't give you a lifetime supply of insulin to keep in your house, although the world's changing where things are getting better and better. But as far as options, right? Options keep, advancing. But then maybe you can find supplements or maybe you can start exercising and change your diet. And, obviously type 1 diabetes, you can't fix that, right? I get that. But, maybe there's steps we can get to reduce medication. Maybe we talk to our doctor and say, hey, what could I do? See, I have to take this right now and I'm kind of dependent on it. Is there anything I can do to change my health? There's some things that you can't, right? That's just how the world is. Sometimes things are crappy. You could also look at supplements that maybe ease things. And I'm talking more like medicinal, like plants and that kind of thing. You could research that world. Or how do you solve your health needs through plants and vitamins? That's another big thing. So, water. Water would be the next thing, right? How do I solve that problem? Now, again, if all I'm preparing for is economic collapse, I have a well, there's a real good chance that my electric company is going to stay on in the fantasy world that I'm living. So I don't need to worry that much. Now, I added a solar well pump to my situation because I think that electricity may go away as one of the things that I prepare for. Um, but you find a way. Maybe it's a hand pump. Hand pumps aren't great for deep wells, but just something to keep in mind. There's also, you can dig those little wells, if you want, and, with the little spike and dig the 10, 15-foot well. Maybe that works at your house. It doesn't work with everybody's groundwater, but you want to think about options. Kevin, anything?
Yeah, I mean, you want to think about other options, and even something stupid like having a swimming pool or having 55-gallon drums where where it's attached to your water system. It fills the drum before it goes to your faucet. So it's always being refreshed. But there's a lot of things that you have to think about that are pertinent to your environment and where you're at. If you live out in the desert, water might be one of your major concerns. It might be one of the things you want to be thinking about all the time.
All the time. Even when you drive to the next town or whatever, you need to be thinking about water.
Right.
That's
Exactly.
hey, do I have a couple of gallons in the car just in case? Because
Hmm.
that matters.
Yeah.
And that stuff goes away quick. And last thing I think, is an energy system, right? What happens if my electricity goes away? Again, you have to fit the scenario that you're preparing for and then fit these things into yours. If you're like, well, I just think that we're going to have jackbooted thugs kicking in the doors, well, then maybe having, a solar system isn't your biggest priority, right? That's not where you need to have your heavy focus. But if you need electrical things, you need to think about solar generators. I gotta say, flashlights and stuff are kind of something you might want to have into the future, right? If the world goes bad, I want flashlights at a minimum to still work. But do I need to be able to power up my cell phone and my laptop? Not important to me, but it might be important to other people, right? You decide what's right for you. Maybe that's solars, that's generators, that's fuel storage. You have to figure out what's going to work for your plan. But that's really basically what it comes down to is you need to have that plan, right? But make your plan for your concerns. Whatever you're preparing for. If you lay out that plan first, then you can spend your money so much wiser. And one of the big things I think is people become so desperate to, I need X amount of electricity to run my house or run my homestead. But maybe you need to say, hey, how can I cut back how much electricity I use? Maybe I make an alternative to using the washing machine or the dryer. Maybe it's as easy as a clothesline and I just cut my electric bill in half, right? Because I bought a clothesline. Maybe that's something people should start thinking about with electric bills these days. Um, Maybe it's, do I wash my clothes in a bucket? Now, why would I do that if it's so easy that I can just use the washing machine? But you come up with an alternative to whatever the problem it is that you're trying to solve. You come up with the alternative for how do I get water without it coming from town, right? In that main pipe. Um, that's, think about what people used to do before that town water came in, me and Kevin, we were talking about there was a well right in the middle of his town in Saugerties there in New York, where, in one of the businesses, they just had a well in the basement that you could just, drop in a bucket and pull out water. Well, knowing where those resources are, it's going to make a big difference in how you're able to survive and function. Um, so it doesn't have to be, I need a year of food saved up. It needs to be, how am I going to feed my family for a year?
Right.
And that may be, maybe I have the garden. And maybe you're like, Chuck, there's no way I can have a garden and whatever. Well, maybe you need to bug out from where you're going from, and that's your plan.
Mhm.
Or maybe you buy the year of long-term storage and you find a way to get through the hard winters till you can resupply in the spring. That's the you need to have a plan for your situation and do that before you spend the money. Like I said, there's always basics you can get, but don't just recklessly spend your money. Make sure you're spending it on things that the value in the dollar is going to actually go somewhere. So that's really where, what I wanted to talk about and give you guys an idea of, have a plan, make things work for you. So that's what I got. So with that, I would say stay safe and we will talk to you guys next week.